You know the feeling. He does something that hurts you, or he goes cold, or he pulls away without warning. And instead of sitting with what just happened, instead of letting yourself feel it, you start building a case. You rehearse the explanation in your head. You find the right words, the calm ones, the ones that don't sound too emotional. You think about how to phrase it so he doesn't get defensive, so he finally understands. And then you deliver it, carefully, thoughtfully, completely. And he looks at you and says, nothing. Or he gets defensive anyway. Or he twists it. Or he gives you a half answer that doesn't actually address anything you said. And you walk away feeling more invisible than before you opened your mouth, so you try again. More words, more clarity, more explaining. Tell me, how's that working for you? Because if you're watching this video, I think some part of you already knows. The explaining isn't closing the gap between you. It's widening it. Here is what behavioral science actually tells us about this. When we feel unseen or misunderstood by someone we care about, the brain registers it as a social threat. And under threat, we instinctively reach for control, the only control available to us in that moment. Words. Psychologists call this verbal justification seeking, the compulsive need to explain our position until the other person validates it. But here is the scientific problem with that strategy. You cannot logic someone into valuing you. Research in social psychology, including landmark work on what's called earned versus assigned regard, consistently shows that perceived value in relationships is shaped far more by behavioral signals than by verbal ones. In other words, what you do carries more psychological weight than what you say. Every time you over-explain, you are unconsciously communicating something you never intended to communicate. Let's talk about what actually happens in his brain when you explain yourself. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the justification debt loop. Here's how it works. Every time you feel you owe him an explanation for your feelings, your needs, your reactions, your choices, you are making an unconscious deposit into what his nervous system registers as a power ledger. You are telling him, without words, that his approval is required for your experience to be valid. And the human brain, his brain, responds to approval seeking the way it responds to any scarce resource that's freely available. It stops valuing it. This is not cruelty. It's behavioral economics applied to emotional dynamics. When something is abundant and freely given, perceived scarcity drops. And with it, perceived value. Now contrast that with what happens when you stop explaining, when you express a need simply, once, clearly, and then go quiet, when you let silence do what sentences never could. Psychologists refer to this as non-anxious presence. It describes the state of a person who is fully defined by their own values and needs, without requiring external validation to hold that position. A woman operating from non-anxious presence does not chase understanding. She expresses her truth. And then she waits to see what he does with it. That stillness? That measured quiet? It does not read as indifference to his nervous system. It reads as self-possession. And self-possession, in every documented model of interpersonal attraction and long-term relational respect, is one of the most powerful signals a person can transmit. Here are 3 specific behaviors that tell you, and him, whether he knows it or not, that you are stuck in the explanation spiral. Point 1, the clarifying spiral. What it looks like. He says something dismissive. You respond. He deflects. You explain more. He deflects again. You add more detail, more context, more emotional evidence, hoping that if you just find the right combination of words, he'll finally get it. What's actually happening, This pattern is called validation looping, a cognitive process where we keep resubmitting a request for emotional recognition, because our nervous system hasn't received the signal that we are safe. Each additional explanation is not a rational strategy. It is anxiety in disguise. What it communicates to him that his validation is the only thing that can calm you down, which hands him, without your consent, a tremendous amount of relational leverage. The alternative. Say it once. Say it clearly. Then stop. His response to your one honest statement is data. Treat it as such. Point 2. The preemptive softening. What it looks like. Before you even state your need or feeling, you wrap it in disclaimers. I know you're busy, and I don't want to make this a big thing, but... Or, maybe I'm being too sensitive, I don't know, but what's actually happening? You are pre-apologizing for your own emotional reality. This is what psychologists call anticipatory self-erasure, a learned behavior pattern, often rooted in early experiences where expressing needs felt unsafe, that causes you to diminish your position. Before anyone has even challenged it, what it communicates to him, that even you don't believe your needs deserve space, that your emotional experience comes with a built-in apology attached. The alternative. Drop the preamble. Start with the feeling. I felt hurt when is a complete sentence. It requires no softening. It requires no permission. Point 3. The post-conversation debrief. What it looks like. The conversation ended hours ago, but in your head, it is still going. You're replaying it, editing your responses, writing the text you haven't sent yet. That will finally make him understand. You are spending enormous internal energy, relitigating a verdict that was already given. What's actually happening? This is your nervous system failing to regulate without his external input, a sign that somewhere along the way, his understanding became load-bearing for your sense of self. Research in self-determination theory describes this as a failure of introjected regulation, where your behavior and emotional stability are driven by the need for external approval, rather than internal values. The alternative. Close the loop internally. Ask yourself, did I express what was true for me? If yes, your job is done. His comprehension is not required for your experience to be real. I want to give you one practical thing to take out of this video. Not a script, not a tactic, a posture. When you feel the urge to explain, pause for 3 seconds. Ask yourself, am I saying this because it's true and it needs to be said? Or am I saying this because I need him to agree with me in order to feel okay? If it's the first, say it. Once, with full eye contact. And no apology. If it's the second, don't say it at all. Go take care of yourself instead. This is not silence as punishment. This is not playing games. This is the recognition that your emotional experience does not require his signature to be valid. A woman who has internalized that truth is almost impossible to destabilize. She doesn't chase understanding. She doesn't perform calm. She is calm because she is anchored in herself. And that kind of stillness, it does more to shift the dynamic in a relationship than any perfectly worded explanation ever could. Because people, all people, are drawn toward those who do not need them. In order to be whole, here is your final thought for today. You have been trying to be understood. And that desire is not a flaw. It is one of the most human things there is. But understand this: the right person will not need a closing argument. He will pay attention. He will notice. He will show up with action. Not because you explained it perfectly, but because he is actually present. And the ones who only listen when you've exhausted yourself trying to be heard, they are not your audience. Stop performing for them. If this video shifted something in you today, share it with a woman in your life who is still in the middle of that exhausting loop. She needs to hear this more than she needs another explanation to write. And in the comments below, drop this phrase: "My clarity is enough." Because it is. I'll see you in the next one.